Okay, everybody, we're going to start in about 2 minutes here. We're just waiting for everyone who registered to be able to access the platform. Okay, we're at 11:30. We're going to go ahead and give it 1 more minute to let the rest of the folks join here. So we'll start in about 60 seconds. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. There's still some people coming in, and I think they'll all be in here by the time we finish our intro. So hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is the third and final webinar in our COVID-19 series presented by IHA, Homeworld Business, and the NPD Group. Today's session is about the rapidly changing consumer behavior since COVID-19 took hold in the US and how these changes might evolve both during and after the crisis. My name is Liana Salama. I'm the Vice President of Marketing for IHA. Our speaker today is Joe Derochowski, Home Industry Analyst for the NPD Group. NPD Group offers data, industry expertise, and prescriptive analytics to help supplier and retailer clients grow their businesses in a changing world. Joe has been helping manufacturers and retailers identify opportunities for growth for the past 30 years through new innovation, new ways to market, new ways to sell and merchandise products. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get going. First off, we will be taking and answering questions at the end of Joe's presentation. If you roll over the Zoom window, you will see a number of buttons appear at the bottom. Using the Q&A button, it'll pop up a window for you. You can submit your questions at any time during the session. I will be gathering them throughout, and then we'll read them to Joe for his response at the end. Second, we will be recording this session, and a copy will be made available to all registrants. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Joe, and I will be back for the Q&A portion. Joe?
Thanks, Leanna, and thank you everybody for taking the time to join today's webinar. You know, these are really challenging times, but they're very important times. And I think these are going to be historically important for our industry and going to be a platform for growth for years to come. And the time we're in, while challenging, is very, very important. What I want to do today is I want to talk a little bit about where we're going and help you prepare an instinct of how to prepare for the life that's going to be coming after we get through this phase. But to do that and help you think about that, I want to take a step back and remind ourselves, where were we before this big disruption happened? And after we do that, then I'm going to talk about what's been happening the past few weeks, share some data so you can see exactly what the consumer is saying and what's going on with the industry. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the future and to think about it. Now, I don't have the answers. I'm not a forecaster to sit there and say this is exactly how long this is going to be. This is going to be the impact to your inventory, so on and so forth. But what I can do and what I plan on doing is sharing with you what I do know and sharing with you some of the observations that we're seeing now so that you can help think about this going forward. It is my sincerest hope that at the end of this call, you come up with 2 or 3 ideas to help grow your business. And just recognize that it is a critical time we're in, and we at NPD are here to help you guys in any way we can. All right, so I'd like to start with a quote. Baseball legend Yogi Berra said, "You can observe a lot by watching." And while I've never been really a big fan of me research, today I am. If you think about the life we're in, we're all being quarantined. We're in essence one large ethnographic study happening around us. And a lot of times when we watch consumers and we observe them, we try to understand the insight. That is almost always what leads to big innovation. I don't know how many of you do concept testing, but if you do, and we do it here at NPD, but a concept basically consists of 4 elements: a hook, a benefit, a reason to believe, and a price. And oftentimes our industry, because we're so technology driven or manufacturing driven or design driven, that we tend to start with what I call the reason believe, the material that we're made out of, or some sort of horsepower engine that we have, or some sort of color design. And while those are important, those are the reason to believe. The large innovations, the disruptive innovations that drive an industry are always solving some sort of pain or frustration. I always like to say, what is the I wish that we're thinking? What is the I hate, the I love, I wonder, I miss? And in today's world, if we do the right watching amongst the different audiences, we're going to hear so much of that what we need to do is make sure that we're hearing those wishes, those frustrations, those cravings, and thinking about what is that underlying need, and is there a different way to solve it? Whether that's through a new product, whether that's through marketing, or something completely different. This is a time for innovation. It's said that when Isaac Newton and were quarantined, that's when he discovered calculus. I read somewhere where somebody said when Shakespeare was quarantined, he wrote King Lear. Well, we're in this great stage right now where there's going to be so much innovation that if we watch, we might be able to find some true frustrations to solve and ways to really help our industry grow, not just in the short term, but possibly for the next decade or 2. So it's really important that we're looking and watching all within the house, not just the kitchen, but throughout the house, from toys to auto to our offices. And you're going to see the trends when we talked about Ford, how all of this is playing out in this large petri dish that we are right now in lockdown. Okay, so that's the big takeaway I want us to have today. So let's talk about where we started. It's amazing to think how far back this was just even a few weeks ago. At NPD, we track general merchandise categories, and we organize them by different industries. So you're going to see consumer electronics and office supplies and footwear. And our friends at Nielsen are very kind to share some of their data with dry grocery and household products. And so we're trying to organize what is the overall spend that the consumer is having. And you see roughly $2 trillion of spend, and we're almost up 2% over this past period for 12 months of 2019. The thing that I want our industry to think about is right here. Look at small appliances. It's the number 3, and these are all organized based off of that blue bar. But small appliances is the number 3 fastest growing industry. And over the past 4 years, it's actually always been in the top 3. It's one of the fastest places that consumers are saying, you know what, when I buy something, if there's practicality to it, and we're spending time in the homes, that there's a need. Now, Housewares is in the middle, but there's also been many times throughout the past 5 years, it's also been in the top 5 or 6. So the industries that we play in have been very hot. And in fact, over the past 5 years, you can see the growth. This chart is showing a percent dollar change and percent unit change. And if we would have looked at this through the 80s and the 90s, and even the early part of 2000, we would have always been up or down 1% or 2. But look at this, we've been always averaging between 2 to 10%. So our industry has been one of the places where the consumer is saying, I want these practical gifts that we have, these practical items. So let's talk about why we've been so hot. And this is the most important chart in the whole deck. So if you can take away one thing, it's this, and try to bring this into what you're thinking about along with watching. This chart comes from the US Census, where they're illustrating the incremental number of bodies. How many more 1-year-olds? How many more 2-year-olds? How many more 3-year-olds, all the way up to the age of 100? So a lot of times when we see trends, it's not so much something new, but it's a large number of people doing that new behavior. And so when we look at this, this is how many more 1-year-olds between 2015 and 25, so right in the middle point, that we see some of those big life moments where we buy a lot of the home industry products are really mathematically where the incremental number of bodies are going through. So the average age of getting married is around 28 or 29. The average first home is 32 or 33. When you become an empty nester, it's usually around 57, and you spend a few years traveling, but then you make a decision. Do I upsize, downsize, remodel? Whatever the answer to that question, that's good for us. And then about a third of the people, when they retire, move more than 300 miles from where they're at. So all these big life moments where you make a tremendous amount of purchases of our products, the math is behind us. The consumers are hitting it. Now, the second thing, which is another subtle shift, and it may not be as obvious, but if you think back to yourself, when we go back and we have a brand new child, you become militant about health. You're going to protect that baby, and you're just, in essence, you're going to convince yourself that the baby's only going to eat nothing but dirt when it grows up. It won't have a chemical. So the moms at that moment, they're very strict on health and wellness. And then they get the fun surprise that when the child turns 4, 5, or 6, they get texture issues, and now mom's in a fight. And that brings in the era of convenience. After we do the area of convenience, then when the kids get middle and high school, mom in essence becomes the Uber driver. So convenience again becomes very important for this group right here. Then when we get to that stage after college and before family and we get married, that independent stage and what we call millennials, this group used to historically be the fastest and the heaviest restaurant consumers there were. But in 2008-9, when the recession hit, this group went home. And since that time, the restaurant industry has struggled. And so what is important for our industry is while every other generation, when we were at this stage, we talked a good game about being healthy, but this group actually acted on it. And we start living to be healthy. Universally, we say we're going to eat more fruits, eat more vegetables, we're going to exercise more, and we're going to eat more homemade, less processed foods. And it is that last one that is critical for our industry. Now, in addition to not going out as much, this group is also entertaining more at home. But what they're going to find out is once they start their family, again, convenience is going to play out. But then once we become an empty nester, and 65% of the people, 55 plus, have some sort of medical issue. So this group historically has always acted on health. The gap between their attitude and behavior on health gets closer. So when we look at these growing parts of the population, they have so many consistent similarities about health and wellness and the ability to entertain that home. So when we organize, and I'm going to show you some of the categories, you're going to see that they all hover around convenience and saving time. They hover about you maximizing the space that you have. They help you to make sure that you have the right experience with the product. About wellness being a critical factor. You'll see the trends behind it and responsibility. I'm not sure if you guys have seen the copy, but we, along with Tom Robley and Cadent Research, worked with Leanna and the Housewares Association to create Market Watch. And this is something that you should get a copy of. Leanna can get you one, but it is a very good way to have a good grounding. Where were we before we started this path? Now, one other thing to be aware of, because this is going to be important when we talk forward, is how are we eating? Our eating behavior impacts a lot of the categories we have. There's a great report that we put out called Eating Patterns in America, and sorry if I'm trumping it, but I'm a believer, having done this for 20 years. But I got a colleague by the name of David Portaletti, and if you're not connected to him on Twitter and LinkedIn, I would suggest that you do it, because he does a lot of great content. But he basically tracks how people eat and drink. Our business unit that does it works with all the major food companies and all the major restaurateurs to help provide that insight into our consumption habits. And David writes this report that's 400 or 500 pages, and it's just phenomenal to really describe how people eat. But if I had to kind of pull some highlights from it, you're going to learn that coffee continues to be very hot, no pun intended, the number one thing at breakfast, and very, very important. You're seeing smoothies play out that are there, especially for people looking for a certain type of diet. Protein, we're in a keto world, and you're seeing a lot of that play out. So eggs have been skyrocketing, portable sandwiches, whether frozen, restaurant, or homemade. We see kids making their waffles and things of that nature, and fruit. For lunch, it's about water and sandwiches being the king, followed by frozen foods and soups and salads and leftovers. And then we also see that a growth at dinner time, a lot of one-dish meals. Over the past 30 years, we've been moving that side dish, when we used to have one piece of protein and 2 or 3 side dishes, into this one dish meal, whether it's in a slow cooker or whether it is in a multi-cooker, but where we combine the protein and the vegetables and starches together. We see a sincere growth in Hispanic food, and in a keto world, there's a lot of protein and vegetables and an increase in sauces and flavorings that are being made. The reason why I show this to you is when we look at the foods that were growing at that time, and this chart is a little bit of an eyesore, and I'll explain it, but basically from left to right are based on size, big to small. So are the circles based on the size of that category. And then I only showed in this chart for kitchen electrics those categories from a high level, not subcategories, but the category level, those ones that are growing. And you can see the trends that we just talked about play out. Cookers, if I'm making more homemade meals, you see whether it's multi-cookers with the one dish, whether it's the air fryers that are working on the more keto-related foods, you see cookers being part of that healthy lifestyle and convenience. Coffee is coffee, and it's just always going to be hot. We see microwave ovens because of life moments. We see toaster ovens because of convenience and entertaining. We see compact refrigerators with entertaining, electric grills because of the keto world doing well, waffle irons with the kids at home, sandwich makers because it's the number one thing at lunch and dinner, health with juice extractors, health with water at home, coffee, and hot plates with entertaining. All those trends are playing across this area. And we also see it in housewares. If we go across here, now the blue are the growing and the gray is declining. You're seeing not only do I have to make the meal, but I have to serve it. So tabletop has been up. Food storage had a huge holiday because if I'm going to make more homemade foods, I got leftovers. If I'm going to entertain, I need those things to bring to my guest's house. So food storage has been very hot over the past 5 years. Portable beverageware with health and wellness, cutlery with a keto lifestyle, and you say the entertaining gadgets for entertaining, and serving gadgets for also entertaining, and all the other gadgets to make the meals that we illustrated on the page before. So the bottom line that I want you to take away is our industry was hot because of the life moments and because we and you guys were just phenomenal at addressing the needs that the consumer has to meet the lifestyle that they had. Okay, so that's the good news. Now what we need to think about, and I don't have the answer, but all of us, remembering what Yogi said, we need to be watching what are the foods that are going to continue on in the behaviors, and what are the new ones we're going to adopt. So let's see if we can identify some of that. If we can think back to March 8th and 14th, and I'm sad that we didn't get to see everybody at the show at that time, but the headlines were just shocking. Try to picture this back into your memory, what it was like that week. We learned that the NBA and all other sports leagues were going to be closing. We started to read towards the end of the week that companies were restricting travel for their employees. We started to read at the end of the week that companies were also telling their employees, hey, next week, don't come into the office. Start working from home. So you can feel the confusion. I'm not used to working from home. How do I handle this? How is this going to work out? And then to add to it, states with governors were starting to tell people, you know what, we're closing schools. So now as a parent, you're going to be sitting there thinking, wait, I got to work from home. That's a new behavior. And I got to take care of the kids from home. Oh boy. So let's look and see what the sales were that week. This chart is going to show the percent dollar sales change the week of March 8th to the 14th. And what was the items compared to the week the year prior? And what does this tell us that we did as a consumer? Well, first of all, those things that we can't live without, specifically water. We can live without food for a month or longer, but we can't live without water like that. And we saw huge runs in grocery stores about bottled water. Well, in our case, we solve a huge need here, and you're going to see it's growing even the future weeks going forward, but water filtration did very, very well, as home soda machines. So we're able to get our own water as opposed to relying on the grocery store. Similarly, look at those items, electric skillets, sandwich makers for cheese sandwiches, waffle irons, all those things that says, you know what, I got to start focusing on the kids' breakfast items. And this stuff may be out of stock. We see bread makers, and wait till we show you next week with that. Bread aisles at that time were struggling to be out of stock. So while we were in this keto world, when we got into this hunkering down phase, we're like saying, you know what, we got to make sure we don't run out of those items that are critical. We got to make sure we have the ability to get our sandwiches. We got to make sure we have the ability to feed the kids. And so we saw a big growth of, you know, my little line, 1-800-CARBS for kids, but we focus on, let's make sure we got them taken care of. And that's an important insight as we go forward here. We also saw that we wanted to protect our environment. Look at air purifiers, almost doubling from the year prior. Handheld specialty cleaning. So we got very concerned about, you know, the cleanliness of the house and making sure that we keep things clean. We saw hand sanitizers take a big spike at this time. People rushing the shelves and just taking everything off of it. I also thought it was interesting that vaporizers and humidifiers, which usually don't do big at this time, but are doing well because they always do well when people have a bit of a cold or a bit of a sinus issue. So we saw a spike there. And lo and behold, if we've got to start storing food, we saw a nice bump in vacuum sealers, and we'll continue to see that going forward. So now let's look at the following week. The following week, that's when the governors of a lot of states started saying, you know what, we're shutting down all restaurants. We're closing them all. They ought to be done. And we found out the following week that of the 660,000 restaurants, 620,000 actually closed down for this period. And David Portaletten, whose picture you see here, he's estimating at around this time that we're going to start to see a movement more in home, and it could be anywhere from 2 to 8%, but we're going to see a little bit of a change, and this number is even going to get bigger and bigger as we grow. Now, in addition to what the restaurants closing, we also saw the news that all of our retailer partners were starting to announce their closing. There was a tremendous amount of retailers across America that this week were announcing that they're shutting their doors for this present moment while we're kind of doing this lockdown phase. So can you remember back to that time? So now it's like, this is really getting real, but we're also getting to the point that the kids are home. How do we feed it? So what happened to our industry at this time? Well, lo and behold, almost 80% of our kitchen small appliance categories and kitchen electric categories grew. 19 of 24. The other industries that grew, toys, office supplies grew dramatically because of not only just paper towels and toilet paper, but also their painting supplies and the arts and crafts. So this goal of how do I deal with these crazy kids and attention, because I got to keep them occupied. But in addition to keep them occupied, some people are saying, and I have to work from home. So there's this urgency that is really being built. A lot of I wish, I hate, I love, and needs happening right there. Now, as we then start to focus on feeding the family, seeing all these categories, and I only listed a few, but picture the lowest one I show here grew at 46%. Almost every category of coffee grew. There are many other categories that grew, and we can get to it. So the takeaway I want you to have is, first, our industry was hot. The second thing is, I think this is when parents started to realize, what are those things I'm going to be missing? Those behaviors away from home that I got to bring in home. Coffee. I can't go to Starbucks anymore. So you see non-electric coffee press, frothers, you know, if we show you the data further down the road, it grew dramatically. Espresso makers grew, coffee, everything pretty much coffee related grew because we can't go to Starbucks anymore. We see kids, you know what, I got to cut their hair at some point. You saw home hair clippers. While personal hair declined almost 24%, home hair clippers grew 33%. It was like one of the few categories that saw growth. So this really is the hunkering down phase. Now the question is, how long is this going to last? And I'll talk about that in a second, but I want us to really focus on, there's a key part, there's an insight. So look at your Facebook feeds. Remember back to conversations. Maybe you're doing virtual conversations with your friends at this time. Look back at your text messages. What were the I wish, I hate, I loves that you were hearing, and how can we do this? I would suggest all of us, if you remember that census chart that we talked about, try to get a feedback loop of new moms. Try to get a feedback loop of kids in that active phase. Try to get a feedback loop of people that are single and before getting married, what they're doing. Get a feedback loop of families, of empty nesters and retired. Use all of that. What is driving all of this amongst all these folks? Okay? Now, today, this morning, I saw this article, and we now are starting to feel some of the economic issues as it relates to unemployment. Some people putting people on furlough, or some people letting people go. So we see some changes. Now, the data that I'm going to show you is new data. You're the first ones to see it. It is something in test. Just like I said, this is a great time for innovation. At NPD, we're also coming up with some innovations even ourselves with this pressure. And so the data that I have here, I want you to focus on the direction, not so much the magnitude. This is still a test service. The other one's magnitude is precise. This is more, I want you to focus on the direction. Because if we look at small appliances, we saw the growth all the way up to this past week. It's been growing and growing throughout the year. I can tell you that next week, it's going to be declining for the first time. I don't know how much. I don't know the categories. We will know precisely what that story is next Tuesday in the afternoon when we have that data. But I know from a directional perspective, it's going to be down. We're going to finally start to feel the magnitude. Similarly, from a household perspective, housewares, we had been kind of doing fairly well throughout the year, but we hit this lockdown phase that we started on the 14th, we started to decline. So the takeaway that I want us to be having is that those essential items to manage the home, toys, keeping the kids active, feeding the family, having the water, preventing the stockouts, those items were critical. And now we got to figure what's happened. The non-essentials, when we saw things like apparel and some of those other industries, they struggled significantly. Significantly. So while we are down, we're still nothing like those areas that are down in the 40, 50% range or even more. So right now, the consumer is saying if it's work-related, some of the tech products, if it's keeping the kids active, and a chance for us to help feed the family. But we're going to start to feel the impact, but not as bad as others. So what we need to be doing, though, in the short term, is thinking about what can we do to help these consumers, because they're only going to spend on the essentials right now. How do we make our stuff essential? And we have some headroom there. One of our biggest advantages that we can do is it is so much cheaper to eat at home than to go out. And if we can help consumers better understand that, we can help them. If we can listen to all those I wish, I hate, I love, we can help them. We have to be agile in our marketing efforts to better connect with these consumers and help them at this time. So where are we going right now? This is what I do know. I do know that despite all the advances in society, mom still does most of the planning, most of the preparing, most of the cooking, and most of the cleanup. She's superwoman. And what we know is historically, as the percent of women working increased, so did their use of restaurants. In essence, it becomes that convenient appliance. Well, we have to think that the reverse is also true. I don't know what's going to happen with employment and unemployment, but what I do know that should unemployment increase, odds are they will be moving more meals in home, which gives us more opportunity, one, to help those consumers with those needs that they have, and two, if we do it right, we might be able to have somebody sustain that behavior in home for a while. For example, maybe I'm always starting to get my coffee at home. Okay, so we have to be thinking about not only satisfying the needs, but connecting to the overall savings that the consumer is having by doing these behaviors at home. What I also know, I don't know if there's going to be a recession or not. That's not my area of expertise. But what I do know is that if there is, that we as consumers never let the cost of food outpace our incomes. Other than 1946, we always let the cost of food, it doesn't outpace the incomes we have. And we're very, very creative in how we manage our budgets. We saw many years ago in restaurants and even at fast food, they would drop the side dish and maybe just have two main dishes. Maybe they'd drop the beverage and just have water. But they're going to do something first to try to minimize the expense, but still keep their current behavior as much as they can. So some of the behaviors that we saw historically, if we go back to the 2008 and 9 recession, and we look at the foods and behaviors that happened more during that period than before it, we saw more batch cooking. So think of those one-dish meals, whether a slow cooker or a multi-cooker. Those needs are there because it allows me to be able to make the product and create leftovers. So think of all of our categories that are related to this. All the gadgets that are needed to chop, slice, and dice, peel, all the things that are needed to mix, all the ladles and things that are used to help serve, all the products that are related to batch cooking, I would keep an eye on. Similarly, when we talked about private label and stuff, that really is more about the foods, not so much our industry. I still want to do some research on this to see, is it more we fall back to brands? But view that second bullet is more about the consumer saying, I'm not going to let the cost of food outpace my income. They also do much more brown bagging. So that behavior, while most of the driver of food storage in the past few years has really been about freshness, leftovers, and entertaining, we will see an increase in brown bagging. So think about the foods that we have there. So we need to be thinking, if this happens, how do we prepare for it, both from a marketing and a product perspective? And then is there anything we can do to help convince the consumer to sustain that behavior long term? We also see them change to different types of meats. So instead of maybe the steaks, it's going to be more of the chicken because it's much cheaper. So be looking at how the consumer adjusts, which might impact your messaging, your packaging, and how you market and merchandise your products, okay? We do know also at that time, we brought back carbs. You saw Italian dishes, bread, cereals all come back because they're very economical food and there's a lot of sustenance. So while I talked about before, we've been in this era of whether it's keto or paleo or low carbs being bad, will it come back? I don't know, but I know it's worth watching because as important as I want to be healthy, we're going to want sustenance, we're going to want to be able to feed the family, we're going to want to manage our budget if there is a way to cut money because of recession. The other thing that I want us to focus on, I love this quote from the left, and this is when this first started. It was an actual post that I saw somebody do that kind of said, hey, it's going to be hard to find things to keep the kids active. I'm going to lose my mind. And I think you're going to see the post that mothers are losing their minds or trying to prevent it. And so you see our toy data is up significantly. Outdoor things related to keeping the kids active are up significantly. Arts and crafts and painting supplies are up significantly. So are there things that we can do to help our consumers who also may be working at home at the same time? Can we help them keep the kids engaged? Is there a chance, as we see in the middle here, is there a way to help them with cooking? Is there, as we see on the right, maybe to get them much more active in keeping the house clean? There's a lot of innovation happening that we need to keep watching for. So what are some of the other things that I see out there watching? I can't guarantee they're going to stick, but I want to illustrate some things for you to be thinking about and either A, anticipate if they'll last longer, or B, can you do something from a marketing perspective to help consumers or even help inspire them at this time? I saw somebody post recently, everybody now is doing virtual happy hours. You know, after 9/11, we sought comfort. You used to see a lot of articles where people would talk about, oh, there's this comfort foods, you know, we're going to make meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Well, that was complete hooey. We never did that. But what we did do is we did seek comfort. And we went out to restaurants and we hung out with friends and family. We had people over to our houses. Pizza at the time was growing. So right now in a social distancing world, how do we build that comfort? And one of the ways that we're seeing pop up a lot is it's a lot of virtual, whether it's happy hours or game nights or communications. And so the question is, can we play more into this? This one person here said he never made an old fashioned. He's trying to learn to do it. He got so desperate, he made his own muddler out of 3D thing. Maybe there's ways that we can help them. Are there ways we see new, not only consumer behaviors, but we see retail behaviors? The restaurant industry is always one of the most agile industries that are out there. And if you see them now saying, you know what, we're going to do curbside pickup. It's going to be contactless. All these innovations trying to survive. They're putting billboards, creating spots. Well, we're starting to see it also in our area. I see Best Buy doing some of this, some of our other retailers. The question we have to ask ourselves, is there even more we could do into this area? Because people are, I got to believe we're going to be a little bit germophobic for the rest of our lives. I don't know how that's going to play out, but are there ways that we can even push and innovate into these areas even different to what we're thinking about now? We also need to be watching marketing behaviors. Starting this week is the first time I'm starting to see whether it's manufacturers or retailers all speaking about ways that they can help consumers in this environment. And I would anticipate over the next few weeks that we're going to see more and more of this. This is a time as an industry that we need to be on the offensive. We need to be out there helping our consumers at this time who are very stressed, who are seeking comfort, and help them understand that we can help them in these times. We see, I like the auto one that they had of a deferred payments for 4 months. You know, I know heading into this, we were seeing a lot more people with subscription-based services. We saw a lot more people maybe paying it forward to buy items. Is that going to be more? Is there innovation from a financing perspective that we haven't been thinking about that might help our consumers stay in our category, stay in our industry, yet solve the needs that they have, or help them live in the environment that they're living in right now? So our thinking has to be, from an innovation perspective, a lot of ways, and we have to stay on top of the consumers. How about this? I hear people talk about, am I going to be gaining weight now working at home? You know, there's an old saying, the frequency of behaviors, and it's been a long time since I've run the analysis, so I don't know the latest data, but many years ago, that, you know, the older population, while they didn't eat as much food, there was a frequency of behavior. Now that might have changed now, But I always remember the old line a colleague used to talk about at that time, where he said, Isaac Newton said, a body in motion stays at motion, a body at rest stays at home, rest. He would say at that time, a body at home eats at home. And bottom line, if we're working from home, we're eating a lot, we're snacking a lot, and our food team can probably help you really better understand that dynamic. But the key for us is, if we are before in keto, our goal was to live healthy, we might have an urgency to lose weight when we get done, which again may change the foods we eat. We haven't been pushing scales as much. We see scales been down. We might be monitoring our weight a little bit more. I have no clue, but I would be watching and listening to the people talking about gaining weight and how they're going to manage it when they get done. And does that open up even some of our personal care categories as it relates to this space? Will kids be more involved in cooking? This is my daughter to the left. You know what? She's been making her own omelet, cracking her own eggs, chopping her own little meat, using this little device. Our kids can become more involved. As parents are working from home, are there ways that we can help either teach the kids, inspire the kids, help the parents create the activity with the kids virtually, maybe develop products to make it easier? We need to be thinking about, can we get them involved? And then more importantly, will that last going forward? We hear some people retiring saying, you know what? When we get through this thing, I want to spend money and live life like there's no tomorrow. Maybe that's the direction people go. And if that's the case, we need to monitor that. Like it happened like in the 20s after World War I. I looked at the eating behavior from the 20s and the 50s, and a lot of it went back to the basics. And so don't be surprised that we get some of those key foods coming out. I saw this conversation about moms talking about, you know what, I haven't washed my hair in 7 days with the kids there. You know what, I haven't even showered. We were entering this phase going into this disruption where, yes, it was casual, but you saw some more formalities. If you look at the award show that we saw, whether the Grammys, the Oscars, all those things that are kind of some of the cutting edge and some of the grooming habits that we have, you saw a little bit change in the hairstyles. You saw a little bit of formality coming. We saw that the percent of women working was starting to grow at that time. We saw from our food data this question about convenience also starting to grow. So it was almost like we were moving from the area we were in to maybe back to what it was in the 90s. But when I see this, who knows, we might be back to being much more casual, which could impact our dinnerware, which could impact the environment we have when we have people over. Or for our personal care folks, if you looked at the award ceremony over at the beginning, we saw fewer and fewer facial hair, even amongst people as I go around. Well, now when we see the virtual meetings we have, we see facial hair coming back. We see even some of the late night hosts doing this stuff. Is facial hair going to again have a second rebound, or were we moving back to like what we did before? How about this? We saw an article yesterday talking about how to wipe down your groceries. This concern about cleanliness, are we going to have a room for innovation in our home environment space to help us with new products of cleaning, not just our groceries, but other things? Are there other ways that we can help make the house cleaner and more nuanced that we haven't thought about? I've been seeing people buying pets. I like these quotes to the right here. For those of you in the home environment space and in floor care, I mean, this might be a great time. I hear anecdotally that some animal shelters are almost empty because more and more people, to keep the kids active, are getting pets. Well, is this something that in the floor care space and in the home environment space that we can start to help consumers with at this point? And last but not least, there's a group that we work with, partners of ours, friends of ours, Civic Science, and if you haven't been following them, they're also a very good read at this time. They do a lot of great polling questions, and highly encourage you to look at what they're doing or talk to your NPD rep and they can help you get in touch with them. But I like this one that just came out yesterday. How likely is it that your marriage will survive? Most are saying it, but you still have a few that are saying not. Now, I put this in there for a humor perspective, but out of reality, on a sad note, if this were to happen, there's going to be more people making those big life moments. And if it is there a way we could help at those troubled times? and maybe help them stock their homes and help guide them at that moment. All right, so in summary, we'll get to the questions here. I want you to remember 3 things. Be watching. This is a time to watch. Be innovative and be agile. Thank you. Questions? This presentation, if your clients of NPDs, happy to get it to you. If you're not clients, we would love to have you come and be part of us. If you want specific things, we can talk about it. There's Jocelyn Griffiths, who I work with. Send her an email, and whether we can help you with a few charts or help you with some questions, we're happy to see what we can do to help out.
All right, Joe, thanks so much. So we do have a few questions here. I'm going to start with a couple of specific questions related to the category growth charts. One related to where home textiles would be found in that chart, or if they're included in that chart, if you have any insight on that.
Okay. Home textiles is not included in that chart. I kind of kept it to a lot of the kitchen electrics and primary housewares, you know, the items in the kitchen without the plug. But we do have home textiles. I don't have it for that week, but I can tell you what the trends were before. The home textiles is the only one of our segments that hasn't seen the growth over the past 5 years. And it's so easy for us to grow it, but we've got to think differently. If you remember back to that chart where I showed the concept, the I wish I hate, the benefit, and the reason to believe in the price. So much of our textiles has been focusing on the reason to believe, you know, about the material, that it's X% cotton or so many thread count, or, you know, that becomes the primary focus. And so while AirPods are solving and talking about one benefit, or multi-cookers are talking about faster, we're still talking about thread count. We're kind of missing the so many I wish, I hate, I loves that are available. Sleep is such a critical part of health and wellness that should be skyrocketing. Concerns about allergies are such a critical part. It should be skyrocketing, but we're burying those items. Same thing with bath. I could talk textiles forever to help that industry grow, but it's easy money sitting in front of us if we try to make it more urgent in the consumer's mind. And to become urgent, instead of a nice to have, you've got to start talking about the pains and frustrations and how you fit into health and wellness and entertaining.
Next one related to questions about how you see any trends that might come out of this related to storage and organization, home storage and organization, or some additional areas of cleaning, for example, vacuums and floor care.
Well, and again, this is one of those things where I'm going to tell you I don't have the crystal ball, but I'm going to give you what I do know is the concern about cleanliness at this present moment is got to be accentuated because we're all washing our hands. We see the run on the hand sanitizers. You see so much of the television conversations about washing hands that this concern, you see shows about how to clean your groceries. Like this concern probably will last for a quite long time and could be taken to a completely different area. So I think from a floor care in that area, it's been hot, so hot because of the life moments and pets being at an all-time high. I would assume that has plenty more room to continue to grow because of this. From a storage and organization, with people spending more time at home, I gotta believe, at least if it's like the people that I know, including our house, we're all just trying to keep it clean with the kids home. How do you keep it more organized? And we saw with Maria Kondo the impact that she's had over the past few years. I gotta believe that that window of opportunity is still gonna be in front of us going forward. The key is we gotta keep the focus on and watching and listening for the frustration the consumer has and make sure we fit it.
One note on toasters and toaster ovens. Now I know that was included in the chart. What category is that under? Is that under general kitchen electrics there?
Yeah, kitchen electrics. So the chart that I showed was toaster ovens. Toaster ovens had grown significantly. They've been hot for the past 5 years, especially as their usage has moved from just being about breakfast, but also to being about lunch and dinner. as well as for entertaining occasions and small spaces. Toasters hasn't been seen as much of that bump, but it is one of the things that we can get you the trends on.
Okay. A few questions. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
No, go ahead.
Okay. A few questions related to your thoughts on, you know, as we get through this and more folks are turning to online shopping during the crisis, how that might play out post-crisis. Will we want to get back out to the stores, or will online, you know, command an even larger percentage of consumer sales after that?
And that's a really good question, and that's one of the ones that we've got to continue to monitor. I know that as we headed through the periods that I was showing you up to the 21st, I wasn't seeing as much of a shift in the impact at that moment. But obviously, once the retailers started to close, we're seeing more and more of it obviously happening online. For it to stick, I think the bigger question is how do we execute upon this is going to be one of the key components. How are the consumers experiencing it? You know, is the younger consumer, when they hit those life moments, still going to seek the guidance to help better solve those life moments because I'm buying so many gifts? Is it that the older population who might have not been as technically savvy, but now by doing virtual meetings and virtual discussions with their families and virtual, did they become more technically savvy and more open to do it? So I'm not sure how it's going to play out, but I would advise us to keep watching the nuances with it. And it is certainly something to keep on our radar as we go forward.
Sure.
We see a lot of times even some of the CPG items that are starting to flow through there and the general, like how that whole mix plays out, I think is going to be an impact. I don't have the data to give you definitive answers yet. We will, you know, we can touch base in the future with it and keep monitoring. If those of us who are clients keep sticking with it, we'll get you the data. But it is something that I would keep watching right now.
Okay. Moving into the conversation about kind of comfort and the need for comfort right now, you mentioned it in terms of some of the foods that consumer, you know, the appliances folks are buying and the foods that they're cooking at home. Do you see that need for comfort, that desire to comfort? Do you anticipate that will extend beyond food and into things like candles and blankets and other types of, you know, around the home comfort type items?
The Hygge related items, right?
Yes.
What I will say is there's no doubt in my mind in this period right now that comfort is a key need, but it's also managing the chaos with the kids and everything that we talked about. So it's this, there's stress, there's, you know, anxiety about not only am I going to get sick or family getting sick, but the bigger issue is how do I manage this balance of wanting to create comfort and chaos? So could things that are the Hygge related, things like candles and things like that help? Absolutely, but it still has to push. Like, what I do know is this, we clearly are, when we look at the sales data, not only in our categories, but in other categories that NPD tracks, those things that are non-essential because of the unemployment, because of the people being furloughed, because of the math that we're seeing, the millions that the numbers last week and this week are now starting to show, like all of those things that are considered non-essential are highly at risk. We are going to spend money on those things that are considered and deemed essential. So while I want to be comfort, the key is, can those items get into that mindset as an essential? So it's one of those things you can't wait for the consumer. This might be one where you got to market and put your products into that mindset. You know, I kind of, you know, some of the folks who had heard me speak many before would have known, like when we did a kitchen remodel, we would always see that Housewares never really got the benefit of being always as part of it like Kitchen Electrics did. And I viewed that always as like going to a restaurant and the waiter not asking if you would like dessert. Now, we can have a good meal without dessert, but we can have a great meal with it. It's the same thing now. If we want to be calm, if we want to do a life moment, a kitchen remodel, we got to ask to be part of it. If we want to be part of being a calm lifestyle and helping manage that, you've got to ask for the order.
Interesting. Maybe somewhat related, as consumers are making decisions about what they're going to buy, do you anticipate that they will, and certainly some of this may depend on what happens with some of the aid packages coming out and subsequent consumer confidence, but do you anticipate that consumers will start to trade quality for price, that they'll start to shop on price as opposed to quality?
Well, let's think through this before we do this. Heading into this phase, we were clearly in a value. I always like our restaurant industry at that time, before we entered into, this 2020 here, that while it was declining, a lot of the areas that were growing were those things that I call just above the floor. Think of your Panera Breads at that time, or your fine dining, things of those nature. And whenever we would do price comparisons and price levels within other categories, if there was innovation, the price bands that were just above the floor and at the higher end always were growing. In essence, the consumer was saying, if I'm going to spend money, I'm willing to do it, but I want to spend it on value than price. For those categories where there was no innovation, it was always about the lowest price. So now, as we enter into this phase, and if it's going to be there, the question is how valuable is it? We have an opportunity. What I would challenge us is, because it's so much cheaper to eat at home, if we can convince this consumer that overall the value is there, they might be willing to spend money. So for example, coffee, it's almost like a religious experience. We are not going to scrimp on taste. So if I got to pay a little bit more for a machine to get the taste I want, I might do it because it's still cheaper than away from home. But it is imperative that we as an industry connect those dots. And it goes across all of those behaviors. So if we connect the dots, we might keep them focused on value. If we do not connect the dots, they're going to go to price. So we've got to be thinking on those levels. What can we do to illustrate that value? There's a couple other things I want to keep in our mind too that is not as obvious. A colleague of mine just said this right before the call here. Marshall Cohn, if you guys haven't heard him, he's another great follower to have on LinkedIn and Twitter and stuff. But he reminded me of a very interesting thing. Our core group that is hitting the first time getting married and the first time home, millennials, right? That group right there, think about them. In just the last 12 years, they've hit two major financial times in the early part of their career. Just as they were looking for work, we had the recession of 2008 and 9. Right now, they're still fairly early in their career, and we're having this. What's the impact going to be to them as they start to think about this? So I don't know the answer, but as Yogi Berra says, we need to keep watching and listening, observing them right now. Today, for the rest of this quarantine period that we're in, there's insights being generated that will help us better predict what the future is. And that is one group that I would clearly watch.
Is in another group that, I think you've been watching to some degree are some of the other countries that have gone through this same crisis, right? And they may not be out on the other end of it, but they're in a different place on it than we are. Any thoughts about shopping patterns that have happened overseas as they've dealt with this crisis and how that might play into what we're going to see here in the next few weeks?
A couple of things that we did see. We saw when the students started going home in Italy, boards and games and puzzles and all of them saw significant growth. And lo and behold, when we saw our toys data this past week, because we're kind of past really 2 weeks since the kids started going home, we saw very much the similar thing. We saw significant growth. So this desire to keep the kids active as they went home was there. We saw in China, our food service data showed the tremendous decline that we saw as they started to close those restaurants. The effort to try to make delivery be part of, we saw all that happen in China, and we're starting to see that play out here. Is it enough to compensate for everything? No, it's not, but it is certainly some of the behaviors that we saw. So at that time, the meals also went to being made in home. And I think we're seeing that as we talk about here.
Sure. All right, we're almost out of time. I'm just going to ask one last question or two related to the decline in kitchen electrics that you mentioned is in some of the most recent data that you've seen. Do you, in your opinion,
And next week's data.
yeah, based on what we know right now, do you think that that's a function of, people have gone and gotten what they've needed and now they're hunkering down, that people are worried about, income and unemployment? Or could it be a function of stores being out of stock and things getting shipped slower and, it just not being available?
Well, I think all those things are at play. I think there's a few things. That's one. I think the other part is we are really, as I mentioned before, our spending is going to be on essentials. And so right now, we've got to make sure it's those items that are essential. What we have in front of us is we do have people eating at home, and they're going to be doing it more frequently than they did before, and they're going to be doing it in an environment where they're working from home. So now I'm eating lunch more at home. So there's still plenty of opportunity for us if we do our marketing correct, but recognize it is now being spent on essentials. The third piece, though, that may not be as obvious as well, too, and it kind of gets back to your online question, we know from a factual perspective that as we do online orders versus the in-store, there's not as many add-ons. And so when you do that, there's going to be, when you look at the overall dollar amount, going to be somewhat of a difference. There's just a difference when you're shopping in store to get that full solution of what you're trying to solve. And so when you're doing it online, it's very possible too that some of the basket implications might be impacted because you're not getting the total connection of dots. So some of that drive could be, as you said, if there is a stock out or something in nature, some of it, probably most of it, is going to be driven by is it essential or not, but there also might be just a basket component that is also at play.
Excellent. All right, well, we're at time, so we need to go ahead and wrap up. Joe, I want to thank you so much for taking the time and effort to put this together for everybody. And to remind everyone that we will be offering a recording of this session. We will send out a link to everybody who registered today. And then, Joe, if you want to go ahead and repeat the parameters for receiving the slides or some component of the slides here.
Sure. And again, I apologize, folks, for that. But for a client, just reach out to your existing client manager. For non-clients, we'd love you to be part of the family. Reach out to Jocelyn, and if there's a slide or two, she'd be happy to help out, and she might be able to help you out more with what you have to. I will say, folks, as an industry, it is critical what we do right now. The role that we play in consumers' lives and the impact that we can have from a comfort, from a new behavior, this is going to last for the next 10 to 15 years. We're ready for the next era of behavior. And all of us on this phone can make a huge impact to our industry and to the consumers' lives. If there's anything we can do to help you guys, we care very much about your success in these times. If we can help, we're happy to do it. Stay healthy.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everybody. Have a fantastic weekend. Stay safe.